Man is made of dirt. I saw him made. I am not made of dirt. Man is a museum of diseases, a home of impurities. He comes today and is gone tomorrow. He begins as dirt and departs as stench. I am of the aristocracy, of the imperishables, and man has the moral sense. You understand? He has the moral sense that would seem to be difference enough between us, all by itself. I know your race. It is made up of sheep. It is governed by minorities, seldom or never by majorities. It suppresses its feelings and its beliefs and follows the handful of the handful that makes the most noise. Sometimes the noisy handful is right, sometimes wrong, but no matter, the crowd follows it. That was Mark Twain from The Mysterious Stranger and Other Stories. And this is All Minus One. Hey guys, please like, share, subscribe, leave a comment. I will try to get back to you. If you do, we can have a discussion as I sometimes do. Go follow me on locals at All Minus One. Therefore, if my YouTube gets banned or whatever, I still am able to do this. I'm working on alternate tech platforms. A lot of them right now because they were using alternate servers and there's a big cry for deplatforming anyone of voices that are not of the crowd, that minority. We are we who are liberty-minded, who wish to speak, who wish to seek and tell the truth, even if we do so earnestly and end up being wrong, we believe in the idea of free speech. So a lot of these places, their servers aren't up, or they're being crashed right now because everyone's jumping ship. Now, I don't believe in jumping ship. I think you ride out the wave. So I will continue to make videos until my channel gets so big that YouTube notices me and it deletes me. But I do have some hope because Computing Forever, that is Dave Cullen's YouTube page, was back up last night. So, I mean, good for Dave. Dave makes great material exposing the things of the current age and the folks who wish to rule the world. The elites, if you would. Anyways, I'm also on Rumble. You can find me on Subscribestar over at All Minus One. That's just a way, if you wish to donate, to provide finances to me. It's $5 a month. I don't have any tiers, but consider going over there. I know it's lean times right now, folks, so I completely understand. If you cannot do that, nor do I ask you to do that, it's all voluntarily. I have a live show, The Ends Justify the Memes, and that is on DLive and YouTube. We regularly stream every Wednesday, 7 p.m. And tomorrow, this is January 20th, tomorrow, we will have Jeremy from the Weekly Narrative. And this weekend, Saturday the 23rd, we will do a special stream at 3 p.m. with Rebecca from the show Beauty and the Beta, soon to be renamed, I believe, the Matt and Blonde Show. And also, she has her own YouTube channel, Blonde and the Belly of the Beast. Go check out her Legal Man interview, by the way, that she just did, because it was quite excellent. I happen to agree very much with many of the things that the gentleman said. So, with all that, let's get into today's topic, and that is going to be banking, how influential banking is in the world, and these NGOs. So, let's start with this. From Dough Roller, the 10 largest banks in the world. This was December 10th, 2020, so very up to date. And if we scroll down here, we have a list. Largest banks in the world. This is just the top 10. It says the Industrial Commerce Bank of China. Okay? Headquarters in Beijing. The Chinese Construction Bank Corporation. Headquarters in Beijing. The Agricultural Bank of China. It is headquartered in Beijing. Perhaps you are seeing a pattern here. Then we have Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group. This is, of course, in Tokyo, Japan. Then we have the Bank of China, which is in Beijing once again. Finally, at number 6, we come to an American bank, JP Morgan Chase, which is located in New York City. And we can read all this stuff, but I expect you guys to be educated and do so yourself, because what I do, if you are new here, is I bring up a lot of information. I talk about things just from a perspective of classical liberalism, how to build strong societies, and somebody who believes immensely in the Christian faith, based on the first through third century writings of the Christians, not necessarily any sort of modern, not I wouldn't say interpretations, but modern corruptions. Now, there were things with the early church where they could not foresee how the world would be today. And there were things that they did that were maybe a little extreme compared to what we would consider was the actual message of Christ. However, generally speaking, we get a lot mixed up in our modern day with the church and how they believed and thought about things by making up and overcomplicating the scriptures. In any case, HSBC Holdings. So this is in London. So far, out of 7, we have one bank in the U.S. P&B. This is in Paris, France. And then the Bank of America, which is in Charlotte, North Carolina. And finally, Wells Fargo. So there were 3 in the United States within the top 10. But we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and they are in the top 5 in China. And why do I bring this up? Because banking is hugely influential to how the world is directed, how governments act, how people and corporations are influenced. And right now in the United States, we are heading towards hyperinflation. During the Trump administration, he basically continued or allowed the Federal Reserve to continue old policies. Now, we can talk about the Federal Reserve real quick, because a lot of people aren't aware that the Federal Reserve isn't really federally owned. And this is from the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System itself. This is their website, folks. It says the Federal Reserve System is not owned by anyone. The Federal Reserve was created in 1933 by the Federal Reserve Act and serves as the nation's central bank. The Board of Governors in D.C. is an agency of federal government of the federal government and reports to and is directly accountable to Congress. That's not necessarily true. We haven't audited the Fed like ever. They kind of just do whatever they want. Congress does not give any sort of orders to the Fed. They appoint these members, the Senate confirms them, and they basically do as they please. And what they do is generally based on world guidelines from other bankers around the world, from other institutions, NGOs, such as the Trilateral Commission or the Council of Foreign Relations, people like that, people in the World Economic Forum, which I've been talking about a lot, the World Bank, all this stuff, right? And so it does have shareholders, and we do pay interest. Most of our national debt is just to interest on the Federal Reserve Bank. But it was created essentially to stabilize the economy, to stabilize inflation. It says here, the Federal Reserve is a centralized bank. This is the balance, by the way. This was written February 7th, 2020. For the United States, its decisions affect the U.S. economy. Yes, because they dictate the rates of interest, and they artificially keep them low, which is a bad signal for free markets. You can't have technically you can't have a free market with a centralized bank. It doesn't work that way. A free market is always going to be based in a monetary system that is in the hands of the market itself, meaning the people. Economics, as Ludwig von Mises said in his giant treatise, which I have a copy of downstairs, maybe I'll bring around sometime, is this gigantic book that is economics, as he said, is human action. Human action. It is what we do in exchange with each other. This is something the communists seem to miss, actually. In any case, it says who owns the Federal Reserve? The Federal Reserve is an independent entity established by the Federal Reserve Act in 1933 under Woodrow Wilson. Wanted a government-appointed central board. Congress wanted 12 regions, so that's basically what we got. We got a compromise in that. But the board members' terms deliberately do not coincide with those of elected officials. The president appoints the Federal Reserve Chair, currently Jerome Powell. Congress must approve the president's appointment. The chair must report on the Fed's actions to Congress, but they do, again, nothing about it, generally speaking. So it gets into things about Dodd-Frank and Wall Street reform, the 2008 crisis. Now, we went to that crisis because of stock exchange stuff, but one of the things that we do as well is we bail those companies out, right? We have the FDIC, which is the $200,000 guarantee that the Treasury Department will bail you out if a bank is robbed or whatever. We started doing all this because we had a few run-ins in the banks early, but we had runs on the bank because, well, frankly, folks, bankers have been doing shady practices for a very, very long time, and I'm going to show you that. The Fed's board is an independent agency of the federal government. It's not federal, it's independent. But its decisions don't have to be approved by the president's legislators or any elected officials, as I just stated. Equally as important, the Fed does not receive any funding from Congress. Instead, its funds come from its investments. It receives interest from U.S. Treasury notes, bonds. It is acquired as part of an open market operation. So what it does is it invests in other foreign banks, receives interest on foreign currency investments, blah, blah, blah. The reason why this system works is because we are considered the world exchange standard. And we are tied to the petrodollar. We are tied to oil. So it gives us a little bit of a commodity standard, but we're not on a gold standard, which is the constitutional standard. When anyone talks about us following the Constitution, your first thing should be, well, why don't we use gold as a means of standard exchange? And a lot of you might go, well, but Bill, I don't want to carry a bag of gold around. No, you carry a note that says it's good for the exchange of gold. Bad banking practices are fiat currency, fractional reserve currency. They can actually lend out 10 times the amount that they have in the bank, that they actually possess. So they literally create money out of thin air and constantly inflate it. So it says, to be a member of the Federal Reserve System, commercial banks must own shares of stock in 12 regions. So it's owned by other banks. These stocks can't be traded. These don't give the member banks voting rights. These pay out dividends mandated by law to be 6%. And again, that shouldn't be set by law. That should be a market value. That would educate them if they're making good or bad decisions. Instead, they just go, well, we're going to keep interest rates low. We're going to do more of that, and we're going to pump more money to the economy. 66% of all money ever printed since we got off the Bretton Woods standard have been printed this past year. So we are going to continue that this year, this fiscal year of 2021. It is in the Federal Reserve's actual website. They say they're planning on doing this, and this is going to cause massive inflation, probably tanking our economy even more, meaning that the world's economy, the world's standard of the U.S. dollar will go away. What do you think will replace that? Well, probably one of these top 10 banks and their systems. So let's go on. The Fed monetary policy can do its job better when it is shielded from short-term political influence. It must be free to set expectations, especially about inflation. It cannot do this when its leaders are worried about being fired by elected officials. How is the Fed held accountable? Although it is independent, the Fed is still accountable to the public and Congress, yet we never do anything about it. Ron Paul led campaigns to either end the Fed or audit the Fed, and they were always shot down. Bernie Sanders even talked about it. It's shot down. It's laughed at. No one does it. They like the way the system is because the system is a globalist system. It's not about our nation or our nation state. It's not about the American people. It's not about our sovereignty. It's about a global community. And that might be an okay thing, except for I don't know what somebody's needs in Russia or China or Australia or Africa have to do with my needs over here in West Virginia. Much like I don't think that my needs over here in West Virginia have anything to do with Chicago or Texas or California. So I could go on and on, but I want to show you a larger list. This is just a wiki list of the top 100 banks. This list is based on the April 2020 S&P Global Market Report of the 100 largest banks in the world. The rankings are based upon assets as reported and was not adjusted for different accounting treatments. Accounting treatment affects the assets reported. For example, the United States uses USGAAP So, well, I can't see what that says there. Let's see if this works. The generally accepted accounting principles. Okay. Guys, I know basic economics. I don't know all the, let's say, money marketing terminology as opposed to IFRS. Anyways, you can look this up yourself. Just go to list of largest banks. Do your little DuckDuckGos, your Googleings, your Bings, whatever you like to use. Anyways, it talks about the differences and all that. But here's the main thing. We have total assets in billions. And again, we have China, 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 China. There's Mitsubishi, HSBC. Here is America, France, Japan, America again. So we still got quite a few in the top 20. Japan, I'm not sure whose flag that is. Spain, okay. And we just go down the line. Here, all the way at 21 is Deutsche Bank. And then 22 is Bank of Communications. And then 23 is the Bank of Canada, Royal Bank of Canada. And you go through, again, you have China again. And if I make this a bit smaller so we can see this in perspective, you're going to see a lot of Chinese flags through here because China's economy is growing and they are investing in a lot of infrastructure. Now, do they have all the top banks? No. But they have a lot of banks in the top 100. So do other nations. But we can speculate one thing. Those who have the most financial control in the world will become the new financial leaders and the new currency. Why do you think all of the corporations are cowtailing to China right now? Why do you think that we have unequal trade policies with them? Now, to my estimation, most of this was planned. Most of this was maybe not fully planned per se, but was like, okay, we're going to allow this to happen. Why do I say that? Well, I say that because of many actions that people have done over the years. History, my friends, history. So, by country or territory, number of banks and top 100 by total assets. China has 19, followed by America at 11, followed by Japan. And then what you'll see here is France, South Korea, and the UK have 6, and then the numbers start to fall dramatically. So, understand this. When we talk about China being a threat to America's national sovereignty, it's because we are talking about their growth, not just their military. We're talking about their influence. We look at things like how right now Star Wars is going to have exclusives only in China. That's what they're saying. We see that the corporate media kowtows to China. They won't say that the Wuhan flu came from Wuhan, right? Start perceiving the world in a way in which is educated and not just fed to you. Now, you can believe what you want. I'm just trying to give you information. Of course, I have my perspective. But a lot of people would agree with me, and especially people who follow these things closely. Now, this is Statista. I always get that wrong. Anyways, so again, this is the largest banks globally as of December 2019. So this is a year ago, or 2 years ago now. Let me expand those statistics so we can see. We got China, 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 then France, China, US. Same list I basically showed you, but you can see here in a graph form, in a bar graph form, the difference. When we get down here to the United States, right, we look at this compared to this. This is double the amount. They have 19 of the world's top 100 banks. 19. Do you think at all that maybe some of them might be investing in our own centralized bank, the Federal Reserve Bank? Do you think that's possible? We don't really know who the shareholders are. We don't know who the banks are that invest in it. We know that there were reports out in the past that they were doing deals with other nations. They were giving bailouts to other nations without telling us. Because they can. They're not a government agency. This is from the World Bank itself. It says This was 2018. The Changing Wealth of Nations in 2018. It says this is the first time the World Bank has published a book on wealth accounting. Excuse me. It says that the change of wealth of nations in 2018 tracks the wealth of 141 countries between 1995 and 2014. And it talks a little bit about how they calculate this and how it's changed. It says what we've learned from wealth versus GDP. It is useful to think that GDP is a return on wealth. GDP is calculated by looking back on the previous year's economic activity and is considered a flow measure. Wealth and its composition tells us of the portfolio of assets or stock produced, natural, human capital. That's really important, guys, because the banks, they don't mess around when it comes to like actual how economics work. No. They might be able to manipulate markets because they're Keynesian as far as their economic outlooks. But regardless, and they all run on fiat currency, regardless, like forget all that. What you do is capital. This Marxian idea that capitalism is only those who have power and only the proletariat is silly. And Marx was part of the proletariat, by the way, folks. Or sorry, not the proletariat, the bourgeois, the upper class. Marx was part of that. His family was wealthy. Never worked a day in his life. Wrote a little bit. Engels probably wrote most of his stuff. And his father had to bail him out several times. So, should wealth accounting replace GDP as a measure? This form of accounting should be viewed as a complement to GDP and not as a replacement. Are country trends for GDP and wealth similar, or do they vary? Yeah. So anyways, we go through all this. It says here, country trends are similar when looking at wealth and GDP. Part of the one reason for this is that they produce capital and human capital, again, human labor, which account for more than 90% of total wealth. How very free market of you, World Bank. It's very strange you would say such a thing. Are often correlated with GDP. Nevertheless, there can be situations in which trends in wealth do not follow trends in GDP. It helps to look at the composition of wealth and the balance among different assets. Which countries are the most wealthy in per capita terms and which ones are at the bottom of the list? So it ranks countries, top 10 countries in terms of per capita, starting with the wealthiest or following in 2014. Norway, Qatar, or Qatar, however you pronounce it. This makes sense in both accounts because of oil, natural resources. Switzerland, well, they have a great banking system. Luxembourg, a city-state, which has one of the highest standards of living. Kuwait, been to Kuwait, seemed like an okay place. There was in a military base there at the time, right before we went to Iraq, so I couldn't tell you. Australia, Canada, and the United States. Countries with the least per capita GDP are Gambia, Burundi, Mozambique, Comoros, Guinea, Madagascar, Liberia, Maui, Niger, and the DRC. It is most important to look at these trends and wealth apart from the level of assets of these countries' development path. Perhaps, but really the development's the big thing. And as I spoke to you the other day, they don't really care to build up new infrastructure in these kind of nations. We talk about it all the time, feed the children, and let's do this, let's do that. But as we speak, China's buying up land and resources all around the world. It's more like communist imperialism, folks. What happened to natural capital over the last 20 years? The value of natural capital assets has doubled between 1995 and 2014. So this isn't about people getting poor. People actually are getting richer. The difference is there's a bigger wealth gap. The other thing that's happening is because of our poor monetary policies and poor monetary system, people have less actually purchasing power unless we outsource, which we are doing to China. The problem with that is, of course, as we found out with the coup, we don't have the stuff here. Australia has found out with China because China owned a bunch of their beds that, hey, if you don't pay up, you can't use our beds in the hospital. Of course, Australia's fought back, but this is the problem with too much outsourcing, folks. I'm very happy to delegate things to folks if I can trust that they will not hold it over me. But when you send out the majority of your manufacturing to other parts of the world, yeah, you might get a cheaper product because their standard of living is much lower and they don't need as much to live a comfortable life. On the other hand, here in the U.S., we're crippled if there's a catastrophe. That's not good. And this is why Trump was a good thing, despite his flaws. And I don't mean the way he talked. I mean, like, he wasn't good enough or strong enough, or he kept allowed some of the monetary policies to continue to roll out. Now, again, he didn't have much say over the Fed, and Congress never addresses them. So go figure. Most of the growth in the natural capital was in non-renewable, 380%, largely because of changes in both the volume of prices in minerals and fossil fuels. Non-renewable meaning, like they said, fossil fuels, all that stuff that the eco-terrorists on the left wish to basically demonize and say we have to get rid of overnight by turning mankind back to the Dark Ages. The renewables, forests, protected areas, and agricultural land did not decline in value overall, but increased far more slowly than total wealth, 44% compared to 66%. That's important, guys. If you want to homestead like me, it's the way to go. Get off this system. Get away from this globalist beast system. In Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa, about 7 to 9% of forest area gave way to agricultural land. That's not a lot. We keep hearing about, the Amazon rainforest is going away. A lot of that, too, is because of the tragedy of commons, which is an economic principle that when you don't own something, when someone does not have ownership of it, and anyone can get access to it, that people will just use up the resources as fast as possible. When you own something, you tend to take care of it, right? Now, if you have ridiculous amount of wealth, that's a whole other thing. You might not care about the value of anything. But if you have a nice car or a decent car and it's all you own, or a house, or a computer, or whatever it is, if you have something you cherish, you take care of it generally. Or you really don't cherish it, folks. You really don't. Your actions are the measure of you, not what you say. The value of total forest assets, timber, non-timber, blah, 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 recreation, watershed, protection services fell by 3%, with timber assets falling 9% globally. In Latin America, total forest assets fell by 2%, while in Sub-Saharan Africa, they fell by 11%. So again, these are the resources and resources we need. Resources people need to live. Always have. Always probably will until we can make plastic houses for everybody. But guess what? You got to make that material out of something too. The principal rule of economics is scarcity and then the division of labor. Those are the two guiding principles. You have to understand that. We live in a world that is in a closed system of entropy. Things will die off. They will fall away. With that, there is some renewed, like say energy, stuff like that, like coal and all that. But folks don't like that. Well, what are you going to use? You have to figure out a way. And they don't think deeper. They only look at surface level. Oh, we could just have plastic. We don't need to have trees. Well, where do you get the chemicals to make the plastic? Doesn't appear out of thin air. We don't live in Star Trek land with replicators. And even in Star Trek land with replicators, supposedly they take the matter from space and then reconfigure it. And then they say, what did you include? Gas. So oil, gas, hard and soft coal, minerals, and it has a list of minerals, cropland, pastureland, forest. Now, why am I reading this? Because these are resources. These are the things that are important. This is what actual wealth is, let's say. What actually makes nations prosperous is having resources. Now, once you have enough resources, you can get comfortable and you can start making more products with those resources. And the worst economies have always been agrarian economies. Once you start getting a real marketplace with arts and crafts, craftsmen, that kind of stuff, then you start becoming richer. But there's a loophole to that, and that's banking. So it says what are some other common interests, yada, yada, yada. It talks about some countries and human capital research, blah, blah, blah. But for the sake of time, go through and read this yourself. It might be an interesting insight to you how the World Bank analyzes things. It might make you start to perceive things, which most of you, if you watch me, already probably don't perceive things as commies, like the stuff just comes out of nowhere. That you're just going to write slam poetry and stuff as you collect your universal basic income. But yeah, it might make you understand a few things. So, one last time 20th wealthy banks from 3 years ago. And this is from moneyinc.com. So, this is not, this is a French bank. I'm not going to try and pronounce Agricole SA market cap. So this is, I guess, counting down backwards. Mitsui Financial Group, Japanese Post Bank, Lloyd's Banking Group, Goldman Sachs. We all remember them, right? And so forth. And we're going to get the Royal Bank here, Citigroup, HBSC, Bank of America. You notice how these changed, right, in rank from where they're at now? That's why I brought this up. This was a few years ago. Change is quick, guys. You have to keep up. Postal Savings Bank of China, Bank of Communications in China, Bank of China, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, Agricultural Bank of China, China Construction Bank, and then ICBC, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. Again, why do I bring all this up? Because it's important, because you have to understand, we've been resourcing things from China. And the banks, of course, are financing this, and they're running their own markets. And they're also buying up land across the world and resources throughout the world to bring them to China to make the things. And basically, we're just relying on China. And what's going to happen as we inflate our currency is most likely China is going to become the world currency. It's not their dollar. I forget what it's called off the top of my head. Sorry, guys, for being absent-minded there. Anyways, a big think. That's the name of the site. How the Medici family created and lost their banking empire. Now, why do I bring this up? Because the Medicis were one of the early banking empires in the age of the Renaissance. So much so that they became highly, highly influential and infiltrated the papacy. They started the Renaissance. We would not have had a Renaissance without the Medici's financing. And they were notoriously corrupt. I actually learned about the Medicis when I was taking art history, which you will have to if you ever take an art history class, college level art history class, because, well, frankly, they were so influential. It says they had powerful influence for hundreds of years. They were well known for their banking prowess and synonymous with unparalleled patronage of the arts during the Italian Renaissance. It says they started in the 13th century, but it wasn't until the 14th and 15th century that the family became truly to power in the creation of the Bank of Medici. Giovanna di Medici opened up one of the first family banks in 1397 in Florence. Medici, by the way, is just Italian for medic, and their families were a bunch of medics, and that wasn't very profitable at the day. So what they did was they went into banking, went into finance. The city which would become and remain the central hub for the family for the next 400 years, Florence, Italy. From running one of the largest banks in Europe to shifting their fortunes and patrons to control of the papacy and other political posts, the Medici reign was a complex affair. This is how they rose in financial prominence. Origins of the banking empire. One of the first Medici bankers was Cosimo de' Medici, who managed to build up a great financial empire by expanding the bank and starting off a trend that would follow his sons and grandsons. He gave patronage to the construction of churches. He was a practical man whose advice to his family was to be inoffensive to the rich and strong while being consistently charitable to the poor and weak. Well, that's good, but I don't think that stuck with them. And it says, let's see here, it was due to Cosimo's meticulous and advanced banking practices, which led to the substantial generation of their wealth. The Medicis would use this impetus of fortune to bankroll their political power in Florence and sponsor the greatest artists and projects during the Renaissance period. During this time, Pope Pius II said of Cosimo that he was king in everything but name. And back then, Italy was just a bunch of city-states. So it talks about some more things that they do. Medici banking system set up the standard of the era and beyond. Aha, see, history. It's important, guys. The advent of double entry bookkeeping was put into practice. Giovanni de' Medici, who popularized its use, the sheer amount of capital flowing through their bank generated by traders during this time needed to be accurately tracked, keeping the books in check. Eliminating error was necessary in a time as the mercantile class had created a boom in the economy. As they always do, that's how it works, folks. You start off being tribal. You have little, socialist, communistic societies because you have no wealth. As your technology advances and you begin to trade with other people, you begin to build together for the better good. You create farming communities. We saw this with the Iroquois nations here in the United States. Then, as that develops and people basically have more food, they degenerate a little bit because they have less. A lot of times, they often have less meat, and they eat more vegetables. This is a common trend. This is anthropologically correct. We can see this in bone density and skeletal height, also in jaw wideness and all kinds of things. So as that happens, people then begin around and go, oh, look at what I made. Oh, I get to think. I get to have more leisure time. As you have leisure time, you're always going to find someone who is either like hyper industrious, someone who just constantly has to work, and they're going to figure out things, or you're going to have people like me who are inventive or creative, and we want to explore things and ideas and do whatever. And then you start to get someone who specializes in crafts. And as craftsmen come up, then again, your society begins to build. This is just basic stuff, guys. Basic stuff. It's also why Marx was completely wrong. Anyways, double entry bookkeeping uses a ledger where the account equals assets equals liabilities. To put to use, this meant that both debts and credits are recorded. They weren't doing this before, apparently, which can be used to create an overview of how much money the business has and what function is being used. It helped merchants and bankers keep a better eye on things. It says, along with this more efficient method, they started utilizing letters of credit. It's important. Letters of credit are basically a check. And this became innovation because someone could steal your check, your letter of credit, but not take your gold because your gold was in the bank still. This is why banks became an important thing, which allowed international trade at the time to flourish. Why? Because you had to travel and it was dangerous. There were robbers on the road. You have no idea how easy your life is today. Letters of credit are agreements in which a buyer's bank guarantees to pay back the seller's bank once goods or services have been delivered. This is what we would use as a gold standard. In fact, it is what we used when we were on the gold standard in the United States. It had on the bottom. This is a note, not legal tender, but it was worth whatever. A $20 bill, $20 was worth about an ounce of gold versus about the $2,000 that an ounce of gold is today. That was a standard in the United States for about 150 years. It wavered slightly up and down, but not much. Not compared to today. But that's how the Fed has stolen your money. During this time, it was too difficult and dangerous to ship large sums of money across Europe. And if you were sailing and your ship sunk, something happened to it, pirates came, whatever, it was gone, right? For this reason, traders would deposit their money for a Medici letter of credit, more than just assisting in the flow of trade. So this was really important, very important, because later on we got into usury, and that's what it talks about. It says, during the Middle Ages, the church had many usury laws, which is the lending of money for interest, a sin. The letter of credit was able to sneakily build interest into the transactions without being outright usury, because there were laws against it. Now that's all we do is usury. The downfall of the bank and transfer of wealth to patronage and politics. With increasing size comes more overhead. Many different branches, departments begin to grow. There were problems in coordinating between administrations and disconnected branches and even other governments. Without a strong leading presence to carry out the bank's function and governance, following Cosimo's death in 1464, the seeds of this integration were already set. His son Piero and grandson Lorenzo were less apt at the banking business than the elder. So eventually they fell, but as things go. The collector, so this isn't actually art history site, the Medici ultimate power and legacy in the Renaissance. It says the Medici family was one of the most powerful and influential groups in European history. They innovated new banking systems and laid the groundwork to make Florence a cultural hotspot. This is what's called gentrification, folks. Capital investment into the area that you live in, building infrastructure. That's what they did. And they used the arts for that because they wanted to make a beautiful city. I believe it was Bernalinsky who created the first dome in like 1,000 years. People have forgotten how to do it, at least in Western Europe. And he showed people the example of an egg. And they're like, what are you talking about? And he's like, it's stronger than you think. They didn't know how to build domes. They forgot. Of course, we know that the Romans did. Through their political strategy and patronage of major artists like Michelangelo, they created the High Renaissance. Such an extended family has a lot to talk about. This is also, of course, the Renaissance brought about. Along with it, there was the Reformation and the Age of Enlightenment, and of course, the Industrial Revolution and the modern era. The Medici family influence lasts 500 years, producing popes, queens, and artists. Bankers are influential, folks. Italy wasn't a unified nation when the Medici family's power began. It was organized in city-states contrary to surrounding nation-states like France. Some of these states were Siena, Venice, Naples, and Florence, last of which were the Medicis took hold. The peak of their power lasted from 1434 until 1737, as the Americas were being colonized, and produced figures who would extend their influence outside of Florence. These include 4 popes. 4 popes. We're talking about the most powerful men in the world who told kings what to do, at least in the Western world. And this goes on how they rose to power, which I sort of just read you, but I wanted to show you that. Familia di Medici, the extraordinary story of the family that financed the Renaissance. This is from Business Insider from 2012. And again, you can read this yourself, but for the sake of time, I'm going to keep moving. What I did want to bring up here was this article from American Banker. Now, I had to archive this because there was some sort of subscription wall behind it, but no big deal. This was 2019. It says the Medici. Yes, those Medicis are back and starting a challenger bank. The latest U.S. challenger bank has a unique origin. The powerful Medici family, which ruled Florence and Tuscany for more than 2 centuries, founded a bank in 1397. Now, interestingly, when I was taking art history, it was probably one of the best classes I ever had, because my teacher was this really flaky woman, but she was very brilliant and gave great lectures, and she organized like party trips to places in Europe, and she really adored Italy. She was very Roman Catholic as well, but in any case, she talked about how she actually met a Medici and how they still had a lot of wealth. So they may have fell from power and influence, but they seem to be able to maintain some of their wealth. The Medicis invented banking conventions that still exist. The pioneer, in return for the forebears' work, Prince Lorenzo de' Medici was set up a challenger bank in the U.S. to disrupt the old school bankers in this country. The plan is for new digital-only banking to serve small and mid-sized international bankers in a tech and crypto-friendly way. Now, if they didn't have money still, how could he do that? We are reimagining modern-day banking by leveraging technology that creates seamless digital customer experiences and expands financial opportunity across the global markets. Now, I'm very skeptical of these things. Why is that? The same reason why I'm skeptical of Bitcoin, because it's not a real thing. Just money in the air. What if the grid goes down? What if the system goes down? I'm a commodities guy. I always will be, because I understand that the world is a practical world. I also don't want someone else going, oh, can't have your money anymore. Last night on Tim Pool, IRL, they had Ian, I can't recall his last name, but the gentleman who's in New Jersey had his business shut down. They seized his assets. He had raised or had over $170,000 in the bank for his legal fees, fighting for his right to peaceably assemble and run his business against a governor's edicts, not laws, not legislation, and random intrusions of his business because of this pandemic. They just seized his assets all the time. PayPal cut you off all the time. Big banks will say, nope, not going to work with you anymore. You have the wrong politics. Bankers are highly influential, my friends, highly influential. So it goes on to talk about this. The main thing is that, yeah, they're getting back into banking. Here, everyone's favorite bankers, the Rothschild family. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about them. There's a lot of conspiracy stuff with the Rothschilds, and some of it may be true, some of it may not. There's a quote from, what's his name, Amsil Rothschild, that is not, there's no way to attribute it to him. He was dead when it was first written down. But it was, I care not who makes the laws. He was basically like, I care not who makes the laws if I control the money. So he's quoted a lot in conspiracy stuff. But the thing is I'll get into that, but only things I can confirm, only things that we can get directly from. Now, I can have some speculation, of course, because things tie together. But what you need to understand about them is that they were very much the same, and they essentially started the massive banking system in the city of London. They also helped finance many wars and other things. But there is some notes that they had Napoleonic War, international finance, changes to family fortune. Let's look at that real quick. The Napoleonic Rothschilds were the first branch of the family to decline when revolution broke out. By the way, one of the Rothschilds now is currently part of the World Economic Forum's Young Leaders group. So I did cover that in another episode, but I can't remember what his name was. It's not like the family doesn't have money, folks. But it's not like the royals either. Anyways, it says they broke out, and Giuseppe Garibaldi captured Naples on 7 September 1860 and set up a provisional government because of the family's close political connections in Austria and France. Adolf Karl von Rothschild was caught in a delicate position. He chose to take temporary sanctuary in Gaeta with the last Napoleon king. However, the Rothschild branch in London, Paris, and Vienna were not prepared or willing to finance, support, and depose the king. With ensuing unification of Italy, blah, blah, blah. So you can read through this. In 1901, Germany branch closed its doors after more than a century in business following the death of Wilhelm Rothschild with no male heirs. It was not until 1989 that the family returned, when N.M. Rothschild and Son, the British branch, plus Bank Rothschild AG and Swiss branch, set up a representative bank in Frankfurt. So again, they got back into it. But the conspiracy is always, of course, that they rule the world. I don't think so. Do they have influence in the world? Yes. Yes. Because certain people like to believe that it's all one conspiracy because of, Zionist and whatever else. No, it's just people that have similar thoughts about world rule and world power. I'm not a Zionist, but I think Israel has a right to exist. But one of the things I would caution you about is if Israel runs the world and the bankers and all that stuff, right? If you're going to go down that rabbit hole, why does the UN constantly condemn them? Because the UN, I promise you, has far more influence than Israel does. By the start of the 20th century, the introduction of national taxation systems had ended the Rothschilds' policy of operating in a single set of commercial account records, which resulted in various branches gradually going their separate ways as independent banks. A system of five brothers and their successor sons would all but disappear by World War I. The rise of Nazi Germany in the 1930s led to a precarious situation for the Austrian Rothschilds under the annexation of Austria in 1937, when the family was pressured to sell its banking operation at a fraction of its real worth, while other Rothschilds had escaped the Nazis because they were scapegoated, just like white males are today. The other day, there was the article that came out that whiteness can be multiracial. Okay. Because you're acting white. You're acting a certain way based on your skin tone or how white people once act. Yesterday, I showed you the World Economic Forum's basic, platform of the Great Reset and the idea that Western values will be questioned, they'll be destroyed, they'll be dissolved. This from a German man, by the way, who sounds a lot like a Bond character. Looks a lot like Blofeld, actually, and dresses like the Emperor from Star Wars sometimes. Nazi officers and senior staff from Austrian museums also emptied the Rothschild family estates of their valuables following the war. The thing is, the Nazis did this stuff, but this same stuff happened with the commies. They did this to Romania, to wealthy aristocratic families in Romania and whatnot. One of the YouTube channels I like to watch on occasion, especially if I need to get away from politics, is one that specifically covers those things, covers like these old buildings and places that are disappearing and falling apart. Says later, the fall of France during the Second World War led to the seizure of property under the Rothschild occupation. Despite having their bank restored to them at the end of the war, the French Rothschilds were powerless in 1982 as the family business was nationalized by the socialist government of the newly elected president. But the Nazis, the fascists, they're not socialist. No, they all do the same thing, folks. They do the same thing. Their actions. I don't care what your words are. And by the way, their words reflected their actions. The fascists said, no, we want socialism. We just reject Bolshevism. We reject the idea of the class system. And we think everything needs to be national, specifically. But then Hitler took it even further and said, no, we're gonna take this. Yeah, we're gonna have a national center of power, but we're gonna take it and we're gonna cover the world and control the entire world. But principally the same, authoritarianism. It says the New York Times wrote that the Rothschilds grossly misjudged the opportunities directed across the Atlantic. Evelyn Robert D. Rothschild as saying that despite the accomplishments made by various branches of the family in international high finance over 200 years, we never seized the initiative in America, and that was one of the mistakes my family made. Well, we can argue about it. Maybe you think all the conspiracy theories are true. Here is a history of their family. This is actually from Investopedia. Talks about their ups and their downs and whatever else, their beginnings, how they began their banking empire. You can go through it. I'm not saying they're not influential. I'm not saying they don't have power. I don't think they're running everything. Now, one thing I can say that supposedly is true, but we don't really know who the stakeholders are in the Federal Reserve, is they might be and probably are one of the stakeholders in the Federal Reserve Bank. For that, you'll have to look at the creature from Jekyll Island. But, that's something I can cover another time. But why do I bring all this up? Because, banking is very, very important, again, and it influences the world, and these people get together. Now, from September 3rd, 2020, the world's richest families in 2020. Of course, we know we had one of the biggest transfers of wealth ever. in history. How did that happen? We shut down these economies. Here we have the Waltons, Mars, Koch, Al Saudi, Ambia, Hermes, uh, Weathermere, Johnson, Boehner, Albrecht, Thomas, Hoffman, and so forth. Look, maybe they're hiding their wealth, but the Rothschilds ain't on there, folks. So this is visual capitalist. I will return to this. I have a few things to show you before I cut out of here. This is the International Monetary Fund. Important. Again, banking controls a lot. It dictates where things are going to go. Who are the banks that are built up right now in nation states? Well, it's China. It ain't the U.S., folks. It ain't the U.S., and it isn't Europe. You should be concerned about this. You should be concerned about this because the world is internationalized. It is globalist. This appearance of actual nation states, it's an illusion. Your president, your new president, who will be inaugurated tomorrow, Joe Biden, he will be one of these internationalists. He's called Beijing Biden for a reason. His son was working with the Chinese to get rich. When he took the office of vice president, he was seen as having $37,000 in assets. 37. Now he's worth several million. Sold his soul and sold out America in the process. Again, it's speculation, but it seems to be the case. The International Monetary Fund is an international financial institution headquartered in Washington, D.C., constituting of 190 countries working to foster global monetary cooperation, secure financial stabilities, facilitate international trade, promote high employment and sustainable economic growth, and reduce poverty around the world. Sounds all great. While periodically depending on the World Bank, its resources formed in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference, primarily by the idea of Harry Dexter White and John Maynard Keynes, who brings us Keynesianism, the idea that we can run fiat currency. It is basically the concept of having communist-style banks that money doesn't mean anything. We can just make it up, print whatever we want. It's bad economics, folks, and it has dire consequences. So, the stuff sounds good, but again, they have a lot of influence. They work with the UN. They work with all these nations. Look at this, 190 countries. We go over to the United Nations. How many countries are, 193 member states? Wonder who those countries are that they work with. Here, from Reuters, by the way, there's a thing that AP and Reuters is owned by the Rothschilds. I can't find anything to confirm that. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. Reuters is run by, Thomas Reuters Inc. or something like that and company. It's a family-owned company. It's independent, always supposedly has been. It's one of the reasons why they're a decent journalist outlet, but they are also becoming highly woke and politicized. The International Monetary Fund has committed a record of $188 billion to crisis-hit countries since 2008, including $40 billion for Greece, raising questions over whether it has enough resources should more Eurozone states need a financial lifeline. Notice how they prop up the areas that have infrastructure, but not give money to areas that don't. Well, this was that thing I was talking about yesterday about depopulating the southern hemisphere and moving everyone to the built-up areas already, Europe and North America. European leaders have asked the IMF to stand ready to provide up to 310 billion, 250 billion euros as part of a 1 trillion package of loans and guarantees to prevent Greece's financial woes spreading to other Eurozone countries. This was from 2008, of course, so old. 2010, May, okay. This is updated 11 years ago. Where does the IMF get its money? The IMF's financial resources are generated through IMF member country quotas or subscriptions that are based broadly on the size of each country's economy. The United States is the biggest contributor with a 17.9% stake worth roughly $54 billion. Now recall, we bailed out Wall Street. We bailed out the auto industry, which didn't need a bailout. They were just crap manufacturers. At the time, the Federal Reserve Bank was sending money to other nations. We recently got stimulus, meaning they are going to tax you. They just give you your taxes back is essentially all they're doing. And they're just still going to tax you again. And then we did a bunch of financial aid all around the world. Please explain to me how the United States has anything to do with the United States. Please, just on simple, basic first principles, folks. Members are currently negotiating new quota agreements. The IMF has about $242 billion in resources it can draw from immediately. So why does the IMF get money from us? How does that work? I mean, that's crazy. Why are we giving money to an international fund for other nations out of our own pocket, especially when we're almost $30 trillion, and we will be very soon at the 30 trillion mark, in debt? We're about to go through really rough times. Who's going to give the money to us? I think it might be China. Highest stakeholders, 17%. Now, I bring this up. I'm going to make a point here. The UN Millennial Development Goals of 2009, and I bring this up on a Google page because I just want you to see. It's there. It's accessible. Here I have the PDF, Millennial Development Goals reported in 2009. Well, this is what the UN says it's doing. Now, this whole time where it needs to prop up Greece, which is considered a first world nation, even though they have a very different kind of lifestyle, it has all this stuff here. International Labor Organization, Food and Agriculture, United Nations Education, Industrial Development Organization, Health Organization, WHO, the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, International Communication Union, etc., etc., etc. It goes down the list. These NGOs all work together, folks. This is when I'm talking about bankers, you can't just, it's not the small hats. It's not the Jews. It's not that. It's not that. It's far more complicated. It's about a bunch of people who essentially, they're aristocrats. They think, I've worked my way, and therefore I get to tell everyone else what to do. And it's for your own good. And they go along with it. They're all Malthusians. They all believe in this global catastrophe coming, and the world must be depopulated. They literally do. They're right about it. I'm not just telling you this because I made it up or I read it, some conspiracy book. They talk about it. You can find it in their writings. The World Economic Forum says it specifically. So anyways, I'm going to keep scrolling through here. This is a bunch of charts and stuff. We'll get to it. You'll see how they divide up the world in certain sections. And this continues, dividing up the world in certain sections. And eventually, all the way, because this is a, 60-page document or something. Yeah, 10 out of 60 pages. You get toward the end and you have regional groups. This is page 57. The world by them is divided into 10 regions. Okay? Now, this may seem innocent enough, but this is about development strategies and whatever else. I'm not saying they don't do some humanitarian work, but they really don't seem to help anybody. Nor does moving everybody into developed nations help anybody. It hurts the developed nation and it hurts the individual. But why do I bring this up? Because they divide the world into these 10 areas. And this was a prophecy given in the book of Daniel. See, there was a head of Nebuchadnezzar made of gold, and that was his kingdom. And then a chest of arms, which represented two wings, two empires that were working together, or two ethnicities, two groups, the Medo-Persians. Then there was the bronze belly that represented Greece, and all this is explained in Daniel. And a leg of irons, which would have two wings. There was an eastern and a western empire. And then a feet that are strong and weak, governments of the end times, as this says, and a rock comes and destroys it. Now, Sir Isaac Newton believed that this 10 kingdoms of the mire and clay, or iron and clay, I should say, mixed together, that were weak and strong, they were brittle. He believed that that represented the 10 nations, ethnic nations of Europe. But I can tell you this, I don't think he had any clue how the world would work through banking today and how interconnected it would be. What we see is a mixture of what the Bible said would happen, of this internationalism, globalism, this total control technocracy coming. I want to read to you this real quick. This is Revelation 13. He said, I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast. Now, the beast, again, is represented in Daniel very clearly. They are nations. They reflect these same nations. There are different beasts that represent each one of these nations. The last nation was Rome. The world is Romanized, folks. The world came out of Rome as far as the Western world. China operates like the Western world. Yeah, they have their own traditions, cultures, whatever. But they're trying to act like the Western world. The developing countries, developing Africa, all that, Western influence, Western world. South America, Western world. Japan, very much Westernized. They have their own homogenous culture. But they didn't operate this way back in the day. In fact, when we first had contact with folk from the Far East, from the Orient, and a lot of trade, people found them peculiar and weird because it was very different. But they still had many similar traditions as us. It's just that they've adopted more our clothing, fast food. I mean, you find Western fast food all over the world. The book of Revelation talks very much about nations and economies and a false church. So it says 7 heads, 10 horns, all that good stuff, 10 crowns. These are specific nations and kings and or leaders or whatever. And he talks about the leopard, the feet of a bear, the mouth of a lion. This was all what this was about. The lion was Rome. The bear was Greece, which had a rib in its mouth, if I'm not mistaken, and believe, or I might have this backwards, but I don't have it pulled up, but I'm trying to recall here. But it's supposed to reflect on the other animals of that correspond with this vision that King Nebuchadnezzar had that Daniel interpreted. And it says the dragon gave him his great power. Well, the dragon is pretty clear. It's Satan, right? It's the evil one, whatever you want to call him. He has no name. It's not Lucifer, guys. That's a transliteration of just the burning one. Basically, it means the light bearer. It's not a name. It's a title. There is no name given to that entity in the Bible. Only titles. Only, fake names, joking names like Beelzebub, Lord of the Flies. I saw one of his head as if it was mortally wounded, and a deadly wound was healed. Now, people think this is a person who's going to rise up and die. This is not that. He's talking about the beast. So he's talking about a nation. Looked like Rome died, but it didn't. It continued on into those 10 kingdoms, and they conquered the rest of the world with their influence. And he was given a mouth to say blasphemous things. And he was given authority for a time period. And there's a woman that rides this beast. It's talked about. That's the harlot, the false church. You have to understand this. Biblical language. Adultery is always against God because you are married to God through Christ. You are the bride of Christ. Here it says there's one coming up out of the earth. Now, I've always likened this to potentially, because before it was the sea where the people were, potentially, to the United States where there weren't a lot of people. But perhaps he meant all of the earth and had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. And he made all to worship that first beast, that empire, that dominant control, that power. And then it gets into the whole thing of receiving the mark. And if you don't receive it on your right hand or your forehead, no one will be able to buy or sell. Now, this is interpreted all kinds of ways. I think the simple way to see it is this is talking about your actions. Your right hand is your work and your forehead is your thought. God said he will seal you in your heart but he also said he seals you on your forehead. He talks about it in Revelation. It's all throughout the Bible. It is metaphoric language, in my opinion, right? But it's quite interesting that we have this economic system that won't let you buy or sell currently, will cut you off if you don't have the right politics, if you don't worship the beast, if you don't worship the nation state. And you might say, well, Bill, but you're talking about like communist type stuff and whatever else, and it's not the same thing because the Romans, they were like a capitalist type society. Sort of. They were have and have-nots. And communists are have and have-nots. They had controlled economics, like highly controlled economies. The emperors controlled all the grain and whatever else. The Senate before that. They had multiculturalism, or actually a plural culture, not really multiculturalism. That's what we actually have as plurality, not multiculturalism. But they had all of these things. You know, this was from William Cooper's book, Behold a Pale Horse. I'm not saying Cooper got everything right or understood it, but he did follow this stuff. Of course, he got into some alien stuff, whatever he disavowed later. But you see this, he's talking about the Club of Rome here. Well, what's the Club of Rome? Founded in 1968 at Accademia di Lincei in Rome, Italy. The Club of Rome consists of 100 full members selected from current and former heads of state and government, UN administrators, high-level politicians, and government officials, diplomats, scientists, economists, and business leaders from around the globe. It stimulated considerable public attention in 1972 when the first report of the Club of Rome limits to growth. Since 1 July 2008, the organization has been based in Switzerland. Interesting. Financial capital of the world, more or less. I mean, not necessarily. There's several. Obviously, New York, London, very much. Beijing right now. We can go through and look at it and all this stuff. Limit of growth. Considerable public attention to the first report, limits of growth, published computerized simulations suggesting that economic growth could not continue indefinitely because of resource depletion. Now you know why I was talking about the resource thing earlier. Yesterday I was talking about depopulation. These people work for the UN, the World Bank, everything else. I just read that to you. This is wiki, guys. They all think this. Now here we can go to the Club of Rome's website. Hub impacts. Climate, planetary emergency. Emerging new civilization. Reframing economics. Rethinking finance. Youth and young leadership. New report to the Club of Rome. Integral in investing. Europe can only lead on sustainable finance if it follows the science. Sounds familiar? UE Sustainable Finance Framework at risk of deviating from science. Because science is now our God. Here's some members. This is their website, by the way. People from all around the world. Got plenty of Chinese members in here. My question is, who elected these folks? Who appointed them to dictate how my life goes? Because to some point they do. I'm going to play this last clip here before I get off. And it's an important one.
A very cordial welcome to the annual meeting, to the 50th annual meeting of the World Economic Forum. We are celebrating the 50th birthday, but much more important is that we are celebrating 50 years of engagement for the stakeholder responsibility.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome His Eminence Cardinal Turkson, Prefect of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development of the Vatican City-State, with a special message from His Holiness Pope Francis. Your Eminence, it is a pleasure to welcome you back to Davos. The stage is yours.
So, I've told you before, the Pope is in on this. I I don't know, guys. I can keep going off in the weeds. I'm getting an hour and 15 minutes in here, but look, man, there's no theories here. These people work together. They talk. They're wealthy. They want to influence. They want to create a banking system they can control. They want to control you. And I'm going to get more in depth in this. In fact, I got a copy, aside from just what I've read from the World Economic Forum and whatever else. I got a copy of Klaus Schwab's book, COVID-19 and the Great Reset. And I got a digital copy. So we're going to be reading it together. I'll do a little series on it. Not every day. I probably won't start it until next week or something like that. Maybe later this week. We'll see. We'll see where it goes. But you have to understand that banking is highly important because it can make and break nations. And the reason why is because if you leave things into the hands of a select few, a few of the minority, most people will follow them and they'll go along with them. And sometimes that minority might be right, as Mark Twain said, old Samuel Clemens. But you know what? Often they are not right. And when they're motivated by their own self-interest and they're motivated by what I find to be evil, like depopulating the world, well, maybe you should think a little bit deeper about following along with what they have to say. Maybe you need to individuate yourself. Maybe you need to not just carry on in persona of the world and wear a mask. Maybe you need to look deeper. Maybe you need to turn to God. I don't know. I try to meet people where they're at. When I make this, I'm venting what I want to vent, talking about what I want to talk about. But understand that these people control things because they control the finances. They control how the finances work. And the more digital we get, the more it's going to be that way. There have been people cut off that no man may buy or sell. They just took a man's money that he saved up for his own legal defense. They seized his asset, $170,000+. My parents asked me a few years ago, when does this happen? I said, it's always happened. But how can it, if it's a spiritual thing, when does it happen? I'll tell you. Wedding cake baker. You know what else? Happens all the time. They cut people off. Can't use PayPal. Can't use JP Morgan or whatever bank. I don't know. Can't use your MasterCard. The Fourth Industrial Revolution, I also have a copy of that. I'll cover that later, is about making a transhuman technocracy where everyone is essentially connected to each other and they will share whatever flow of information they wish with you. And if you're out of line, they'll just cut you off. They'll just cut you off, folks. And so I could say, oh yeah, we're making this up. This is just one guy saying this and whatever. No, this is the words of these people who are powerful. They're powerful. They can make and break nations. They do it. We destroyed Libya over this. Wait till old Beijing Biden gets in office. See what happens with Syria. We'll see. Not sure if we will go in or not, but we definitely won't be demilitarizing. With all that, folks, please like, share, subscribe. Go find me on Locals, all -1. Go find me on Rumble, all -1. Go to Subscribestar if you are so inclined. Throw me a $5-bucker. $5 a month. That's all it is. I'll come up with some tiers. I'll work on that. Maybe we can have a conversation, interview over Skype or something. The ends justify the memes over on DLive and YouTube every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. This Wednesday, January 20th, we're going to have Jeremy of the Weekly Narrative. And then on Saturday, special show, 3 p.m. with Rebecca, Blonde, Belly and the Beast, and Beauty and the Beta, which I believe they're rebranding as the Matt and Blonde Show. But anyways, I will have an interview with her. Should have her for about 2 hours if she can last that long. And we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff. So go check it out, please. And with all that, you all be well.